Thank you so much, Cantor Rosen and Joyce Rosenzweig, for such a beautiful, beautiful service. And Cantor, so good to have you back, and so glad you were able to be away in such a joyful, joyful way. So I'm going to do a tiny preamble to my drash before we get into the Torah, okay? So just, get yourselves ready for preamble and then Torah. I have thought a lot about this specific drash because it's the kickoff to Pride Month, and it's my first Pride Month in this new role as co-senior clergy with Cantor Rosen. And even though Cantor Rosen and I have been here for now already 4 years and have shown up in different ways, there's a way in which this feels different, even if it's just feeling-wise, because it is a little bit different. And CBST has been through so much in this last year. We've undergone a big rabbinic transition, of course, and we are also living in a time where rights we once thought were sacred are maybe not so sacred, especially in the trans community. And we're dealing with rates of anti-Semitism that are, I think, feel higher than they have ever been in my personal lifetime. So just trying to catch our breath and be a human being is an act of radical change and resistance sometimes. But there's also been a question that has come up, not from everybody, but from some people, and that I want to address head on. So as your new senior co-clergy, I have gotten some questions about my own sexuality as the rabbi of the LGBTQ shul. And I want to say I think it's understandable. And because, you might be wondering, what is Rabbi Werber's sexuality? And is she the right person to be leading this shul in this moment? And let me start by saying I have also had all these same thoughts. I agree with you. I'm with you in asking these questions, including about my own sexuality. So I think it's completely right to be asking the questions, and I have struggled and wrestled with them myself. I don't know if I have the perfect answer or the right answer, but I do feel that I should address the questions and let you in on some of my own thoughts. So I actually want to start by saying recently, Scott's husband, Kevin, who I was visiting in the hospital for the past few months, asked me in the hospital bed, so he asked me, Rabbi, where do you fall on the Kinsey scale? Right, Scott? Yeah. Yes, Scott was there when this happened. And I thought it was a beautiful question because I don't talk about it a lot. And the truth is that I probably fall in the middle. And he said, Rabbi, you have to say that from the bima. So thank you to Kevin. So I have often answered the question of my own sexuality by saying that I am mostly straight. And the truth is also probably somewhere in the middle. I am mostly straight, and I currently choose to date men. I don't know why, but that seems to be what I've decided to do. And so I have continued to use that marker for myself. So why is queerness so important and meaningful to me as a mostly straight rabbi, even as somebody who might not qualify as totally straight based on my history? And it's because being queer is the way that I prefer to be in the world. Being queer is about seeing the world more fully, more inclusively, more pluralistically, and with more diversity. And honestly, if a community or space is not queer right now, then I don't want to be a part of it. When Rabbi Klein left and Cantor Rosen and I jointly stepped up, I wrestled a lot with whether or not this would be right for me and for the community. And I asked many mentors and colleagues for their opinions. I felt a little like Ruth from Megillat Ruth, saying, this people is my people. This God is my God. I know very clearly that this community is my community. And the answer that came back strongly from my mentors and colleagues was that being the rabbi at a queer shul in this moment has to be about more than just if you've kissed a woman or not. To which I responded, well, I've also done that, so okay. It's also about understanding about what's at stake in this moment and hopefully about being able to bring Torah and queer Torah to life here. So here's to queerness, here's to sexuality that is sure and proud, and here's to those of us who are still figuring it out. And here's to knowing that this is the community I want to struggle with, this is the community I want to celebrate with, mourn with, laugh with, be in the streets and protest with and love with. And together, we will continue to wrestle and figure out many, many questions. And together, we will continue to lead the way in New York City, fighting for trans rights and all LGBTQ rights, and in leading in being a human in a time of inhumanity in the world. So let's now enter into the Torah. Everybody ready? Okay. So, Shabbat Shalom, everybody, and happy Pride. I'm going to enter right in. Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe lemor. Aseh lecha shtei chatzotzrot kesef makshe, ta'aseh otam v'hayu lecha lemikra ha'edah u'lemasa et ha'machanot. God said to Moses, have 2 silver trumpets made. Make them of hammered work. They shall serve you to summon the community and to set the camps in motion. If both are sounded in long blasts, i.e. a tikiyah, that means the whole community should assemble in front of you. And if both are sounded in short blasts, a truah, that means it's time to head out from the assembly and move forward. The instructions continue. Sound short blasts when you are at war and going out against your aggressors. And during your joyous occasions and festivals, sound the long blasts. So I was caught by the psukim, which appear toward the beginning of the Parsha this week, especially as we approach this Pride service at Masonic, where we typically open with one long tikiyah blast, in fact, to call us all together. And that feels even more appropriate after reading this. It feels interesting that the trumpets, or the shofarot perhaps, are used for seemingly totally different purposes. One, for gathering everyone together, and then second, for splitting everyone apart when it's time to go out tribe by tribe. It's used for announcing war and combating enemies, but then also used for joyous and happy occasions. The Torah specifies, actually in the verse that I read, it says it's to be used for lemikra, calling everyone together, ulemasa, sending everyone out. So it feels notable to have these 2 completely different ideas linked so closely together. But then I began thinking that we actually have a very similar model of contradiction in our own community. Pride is, in and of itself, both a riot and a call to action against those who are against us, and also a joyous and happy occasion. It is both a time where we get to come together as an entire community, kol ha'edah, all different groups, sexualities represented, and it's also quite literally a march. This Parsha is where we get that the Israelites would march from these encampments, and Moshe would say, Vayhi binso Aaron, Vayomer Moshe, what we say every single Shabbos when we open the Ark. It literally means, onwards, advance, and may your enemies flee before you. Not so different from what it feels like the Pride March itself is about, and why so many are careful to call it a march and not a parade. Because while it has become joyful and celebratory, the origins of the march feel much closer to saying, advance, forward, may your enemies flee before you. So let's do a little bit of history, which many of you lived, so please forgive me in advance for sharing it secondhand. But, humor me a little bit. In the 1950s and 60s, the anti-homosexuality laws were at an extreme high. And amongst other things, it was forbidden to serve alcohol to gays and lesbians. And I just want to say, I think it's worthwhile for the younger ones among us in the room to appreciate how amazing that is, that it used to be illegal to serve drinks to gays and lesbians, and look at the time that we're in now. It's just such an incredible, incredible contrast difference. There began to be a movement of small numbers of people who fought back in protest. In fact, in 1966, there was a famous sip-in at Julius, a bar right here in the village, where individuals came into the bar, announced they were gay, and then demanded drinks. And then in 1969, Stonewall happened. Again, I know we have members and close friends of the community who were actually at Stonewall, including former CBST board president Michael Levine, alav v'shalom. On June 28, 1969, police raided the Stonewall Inn, where it was commonly known that it was a gay and lesbian hangout. It wasn't such an unusual occurrence for police to raid it, but this time it happened on a Friday night, and the establishment wasn't warned in advance, so the crowd was at capacity. And they began to aggressively and forcibly drag people out of the bar and it escalated and led to 6 days of violent protests and riots against the police, and ultimately brought the LGBTQ movement and fight for equal rights into center stage in American political and media and culture. Then 1 year later, activists organized the first gay pride march in commemoration of what became known as the Stonewall Uprisings, a revolution that is worthy of celebration, but it's also worthy of acknowledging the bloody beginnings it came from and the fight and discrimination so many had to endure in order to get here. And it remains true today. It feels so important, and not just important, but revelatory and amazing to acknowledge how far we've come since Stonewall and all that has been achieved in the fight for gay rights. And it feels equally important to not forget that without a genuine fight, this would not have been possible. We must sound the blast both to acknowledge the coming together and also the needing to go out and fight against discrimination and homophobia and transphobia that is still present today. So let me go back to the Torah for just a minute before I come back to modern day. The Midrash Tanchuma, which is one of my favorite midrashim, asks, what psalm is this verse about the trumpets related to? Which is something the rabbis used to love to play around with because they didn't really have television, so there wasn't a lot of opportunity for entertainment. So instead they would say like, oh, look at this verse over here. And now we have to like, attach it to a different verse that it comes all the way over here. Anyways, the Tanchuma says this verse about trumpeting is related to Psalm 24, verse 7, which says, Se'u sharim roshechem, gates, lift up your heads, up high, you everlasting doors, so that the King of glory, or God, basically, can come in. And incidentally, this is actually the psalm that we sing on weekdays, festivals, when we're parading the Torah around also. So there's a little connection of Torah here as well. But in this midrash, King Solomon is telling the gates of the temple to raise themselves up or to enlarge themselves in order that there would be room for the holy ark to fit through the gate. The gates apparently did not take this command easily, and they demanded to know who was going to enter, such that they had to change their posture. Solomon said, the King of Glory wants to come in. But this did not satisfy the gates, and they demanded again, who is this King of Glory? Solomon says, Adonai Azuz, the Gibor, it's the mighty God, the God of war who's coming in, the one who's valiant in battle. This still wasn't enough to persuade the gates to raise their heads. Solomon finally added, it was Adonai Tzvaot. For some reason, this is the key. The gates finally lifted themselves up. But I think this is kind of an amazing parallel to Pride and Pride Month as well. The LGBT community has had to continually say, rise up, enlarge, make room and make space for us. And the world has continually responded with, we don't want to. We are happy at the size that we are. Even when the gates are told it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's the Holy of Holies coming through, and LGBTQ people are holy. It takes convincing for the world to respond, and that is the legacy of Pride as well. It is not without major convincing and cajoling and legislation and the work of so many in this community that the world has opened up and widened to be the place we are at today. It has also been true since the beginning that sometimes the division is internal as well. Even in this community, of course. We were first the gay synagogue, then we were the gay and lesbian synagogue, and bi and trans people have also had to fight for their place in the larger LGBT community. Even today, there are multiple Pride marches that will take place on Sunday, June 28th. The Heritage of Pride March, which will march down Fifth Avenue, as it has for so many years, which we will participate in. And there are many who have felt for a long time that that march is too commercial and has forgotten its Stonewall origins, and they will march at the Queer Liberation March instead. There will also be the main Dyke March that takes place on Saturday, June 27th. And Shalom Dykes will be happening at the same time because the Dyke March has stated that lesbians who are Zionist or want to proclaim their love for the Jewish people in Israel are not welcome. There is right now, particularly in the Jewish LGBT world, many ways we are divided. And they are heartbreaking and they are real and they shouldn't be papered over without having significant conversations with one another about how we are going to move forward. And we will have those conversations, I hope, as a community going forward. But what about today with regard not just to the internal, but the external? What call today are the trumpets sounding? Where today do we have to say, raise up your gates, make our holy spaces wider so that the Spirit of Adonai, the Spirit of God, can come through? Over this past year, we have seen over 100 anti-trans bills passed across many states. Restrictions on gender-affirming care, on trans participation in school sports, on teachers being able to use a child's chosen pronouns, what teachers can teach or say, and whether or not you can have an accurate sex marker indicated on your state and federal IDs. Right now, there are so many in positions of power who are doing all they can to criminalize trans lives, to make it a crime to live life fully as themselves, much like it was in the 1960s, to go back to a place where people have to live in shame and fear. And it is now our responsibility to act up on their accounts, to bring the spirit of pride as a revolution and an uprising to right now. So we must sound the trumpets. Sometimes they are trumpets of togetherness, and sometimes they are trumpets of division. Sometimes we must sound the call of tikiyah, to gather as a whole community together, acknowledging divisions, but still coming together joyfully and ecstatically. And sometimes we must sound the call of tru'ah, announcing to the outside world that we are not going anywhere, and we will continue to sound the call of raising the gates, making more space for people of all gender identities and all sexual orientations to feel safe and loved. Pride itself teaches us that this moment is about both celebrating and acknowledging the space that has already been made, but also about seeing what the next obstacles are and who we need to fight and rise up against now. So let's use this moment, this month, to do both, to come together in joy, and also not forget how to shout out in revolution and outcry when needed. Perhaps I will repeat my opening remarks now. Here's to queerness, open the gates, let us all come dancing through. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.